Alastair, thank you so much for welcoming me into your lovely home.
It's good to see you again.
Yes, it's been a while. I don't even know where to start. I mean, we've got this map, we've got the history of this street, but why don't we start by first of all introducing yourself, and we'll go from there.
Okay, so I'm Alastair McLellan. You and I know each other because I'm the editor of the Health Service Journal of HSJ, and you were one of our rising stars, I remember, in 2014.
I was the future once, yeah.
Yeah, so you were the future, like me. Both of us were the future ones. And indeed, I noticed that the year later you actually helped us judge the HSJ 100 in 2015 in the ready expectation that the world would be run by the Labour Party post 2015. Sadly, didn't quite turn out like that. But yes, so that's how we know each other. What's my connection with East London? Well, I have lived in East and North East, East and North East London for most of the time. I have been in London. I came to London in 1986 from Ashford in Kent. Escaped from Ashford in Kent to University at Coventry, and then came to London, where in the mid-80s, if you wanted to be a journalist and you weren't a local journalist, that's where all the jobs were. I wanted to come to London anyway. London was always my destination. And like most people, I sort of found my home in East and Northeast London. Lots of journalists here, lots of people from in the creative industries, and you know it's where I feel at home. You know, there are other parts of London I really like, but this is sort of, you know, this is home for me. And I have lived, so I've in North London and East London, but the east part of North London. So I lived on the Holloway Road for a while, in Archway, and for a long time before I moved to where I'm now in Stoke, Newington, just opposite the ladder on Green Lanes, between Manor House and Turnpike Lane. But I've also lived for quite a long time just next to Victoria Park, and I lived in Mile End and in and Central Hackney. So that sort of, if you could imagine that sort of a sort of that sort of quarter shape of London from sort of Archway down to Mile End, I've lived the 36 years that I've lived in London mostly has been in that sort of space. And of course London, that part of London's changed an enormous amount in that.
Changed so much from this 18th century.
Yeah, so this map is a map that was produced around, it took a while to draw maps in those days. So it was produced for a period between about 1804 to 1814, and so just about sort of, you know, the Napoleonic Wars, the end of Napoleonic Wars, and it's London in absolutely just before one of its inflection periods. So it's a big city, not the biggest city in the world, but one of the biggest cities in the world, but it's just about to benefit from the Industrial Revolution, from the fact that it's no longer spending all its money on wars, and you know, the empire is about to be, you know, really sort of you know, established, and the benefits that will flow from that. So, you know, this is London as had developed over about, you know, 2,000 years, bit less. In the next 50 years, it will be twice the size of this. All of this space that you'll see, the white space around it, here's East London out here, yeah. It will just be absolutely, houses will just go poof. There's Stoke Newington up there. There's the A10 running up there, the old Roman Ermine Street, Roman Road, which you can still walk now from. You can still walk from Seven Sisters up there all the way down to Clapham on the same road that you could have done in Roman times.
And this is the same one that connected through Elephant and Castle.
Yeah. So there's the Oval.
Yeah.
And Elephant and Castle is there. There's Newington, which is where Elephant and Castle is. Home, of course, to past home of NHS England. NHS England headquarters used to be there.
Yeah, actually, there was a housing development, and whenever I was on my lunches, so as you know, I used to work at NHS England. I would see some of the historic, info they had there. So that's how I know that. All of that stuff.
And you can see there's Stoke Newington, and it flowed all the way up there.
I think we have a special guest.
A special guest. It's my son Nyron.
Nyron, say hello.
You have to look at the camera over there.
Hello.
Nyron, you have to come and sit over here if you want to be in the shot.
Join us.
So Nyron is named after John Nyron, who he's most his claim to fame was that he wrote a book called The Young Cricketer's Tutor. It's one of the first ever sports books. I'm a big cricket fan, so so it's about that. But John Nyron had a. This Nyron has London connection. Born in UCL. Where
my children were born as well.
Oh, no, well, and growing up in Stoke Newington. But John Nyron, who he's named after, was also when he's finished playing cricket, he came to London to be a choir master in Moorgate, and became a great friend of Vincent Novello, the famous songwriter and song publisher. So, do you like living in Stoke Newington, Nyron?
Yes.
What do you like about it most?
Well, it's just there's so many shops to go to. All you have to do is go around the corner and bam, you're there.
Yes. What about, apart from the shops, what else do you like?
Well, I like that there are loads of places where you can spend time with your family and
Look
stuff.
at the camera. Yes? Yes? Like what?
Like you can go to the trampoline park, or you could go swimming, and lots of other things.
Yeah.
It's a very vibrant, happening place, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
There's always something to do. And we like going to London, don't we, and visiting the museums and things like that. What's your favourite museum?
Probably the London History Museum.
Natural History
that's
Museum.
very nice.
Natural history.
What did we do last year?
We slept at the Natural History Museum.
We never do sleepover.
Oh, nice.
And it's like, I often tell people that it's actually 50%, because you can't do it unless you've got a child, it's actually 50% of the reason that I had a child so late in life, because I discovered that that's the way that you got to sleep at the Natural History Museum.
Achievement unlocked for Dad.
Yes, it was good fun though, wasn't it? Right.
There's water.
Yeah, it's Addie's water. You can go get your own water, can't you? Anyway, are you going to bed now?
Yeah.
Night night.
Good night.
You can edit that as if.
No worries. Actually, let me just check. I'm still. Yeah, we're still good.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll start off again.
No. Like we can keep going. This is all good. It's still recording, right?
Yeah, it's still recording.
Thank you.
Okay,
I'm
now
always
off you
nervous
go
about these
upstairs.
things.
You'll put me off. Go on.
Nice to see you again.
Right, stay up there
Good
now,
night.
please. So yes, this is London just before the Industrial Revolution and the Empire sort of supercharged it. So you can see Stoke Newington up there on the A10 as it became the old Roman Ermine Street, that gap between where Regent's Canal is, the White Lead Works there. You can see Kingsland, Hackney, Clapton. That was all country. Homerton, out towards Stratford.
And even
later,
even parts of Stratford and Hackney Marshes are, and the Isle of Dogs, water, marsh.
yes,
Exactly.
exactly.
All marshlands.
All marshland, and they were certainly in the north. That was covered by houses in 50 years, just swept up. And so it's so I like this map. One of the reasons that we got it, had it put up on the wall very soon after we moved in 2010 was it's still very recognisable, the London of today. You can see places. Here's the Oval Cricket Ground, for example. Here is St Paul's. You know, it's still very...
And I think all of the bridges are still intact.
All of the bridges.
Vauxhall Bridge, Westminster Bridge, London Bridge.
Yeah. You'll see that Tower Bridge isn't there.
And you also see that the East has not many bridges compared to the West.
Yeah. So, you know, so there's no... that's exactly the point. It's still recognisably London.
Yeah.
But it's London that's a bit different. Like, so there's no Tower Bridge. That's the Tate. The Tate was in fact a prison with famous panopticon design there. So it's a fascinating thing. And astonishingly, despite the fact that it has been up on my wall for 12 years, it has not yet managed to attract one single stain. Not one little mucky handprint. Well, it's not particularly, but it is...
on this wall, anyway.
It is astonishing. But there's Stoke Newington, as you can see. Still then a town on the edge of London, a village on the edge of London, full of grand villas. One of them occupied by Daniel Defoe. I live on Defoe Road in Stoke Newington, and at top of Defoe Road, where it meets Church Street, Stoke Newington Church Street, was Daniel Defoe's house, where he wrote Robinson Crusoe and a number of other things. So again, I love that. I love the fact that I live in a place, in a street, in the garden of this house has been in the garden of, you know, really significant literary figure.
It's literally quite poetic. And was that serendipitous, or you knew that as you were moving in, picking this place?
No, well, we lived in Haringey beforehand, and halfway between Manor House and Turnpike Lane, just opposite the ladder, and we sort of looking around for places, and I think we sort of instinctively knew we wanted to come and live in one of the northeast villages around there. And it could have been Victoria Park, it could have been Crouch End, could have been Muswell Hill, could have been Walthamstow, you know, etc. It could have been Dalston, it could have been any of those areas. We just really liked Stoke Newington, I think particularly, and there's lots of things that other people, but it does have a very, very rich history. Stoke Newington was a place where dissenters came to live, people who didn't follow the religious mainstream. Defoe was a dissenter, and as such, it's full of. Edgar Allan Poe went to school in Stoke Newington, which is, you know, and being a particular fan of weird and horror literature, that was very exciting for me. It's got one of the Magnificent Seven, London's Magnificent Seven cemeteries, Abney Park, which had a fascinating history in itself. It was built as the park where there was a house, an Abney Park house. Abney House, Thomas Abney, and he built a big garden, the back of it, stretching up the back there. You can just see it between there and the reservoirs. The reservoirs, of course, are still there for the New River that brought clean water into London in the 18th century. And when they were building the 7 cemeteries, because all the central London cemeteries will fill up, and in Highgate and most famous one, but there's one in Tower Hamlets. There's 7 of them, and they bought it, knocked their house down, but kept the arboretum, this huge arboretum, and basically built the graveyards or cleared the plots around it. So some of the trees in it are 200 years old.
Wow.
And Stoke Newington and Hackney in general was famous for its nurseries. famous for its hothouses that would breed exotic flowers, second only to Kew really. And so Abney Park is now full of those often veteran trees, but often very odd trees as well, where they're only ones in Britain. And but then, as with many of those cemeteries, it got full up, so it stopped being, and it basically didn't get cared for. The people who were meant to care for it didn't really care for it because it wasn't a going concern anymore. Council did, and it got very, very run down. Then, during the 80s, during the 90s and noughties, the council and the community organised to start to restore it, and it's just now it's having a lot of money spent on it, and it is an absolutely wonderful wonderful place. And again, it's literally 5 minutes from my front door. We also have Clissold Park, which is another fabulous place. Basically, both Abney Park and Clissold Park were the grounds of grand houses that could have been built over by Victorian speculative building, but in each case were saved by the community, who organised to save it.
And touch on that community. You were talking earlier about, as you were thinking of new places to move within that North East London region, you were looking for a village type thing. You listed quite a number of villages, and I'm not quite sure you could say the same for some other places, which is maybe why they went on your shortlist. Further east out, Stratford, Bow. One, do you think that's true, and why do you think that there may not be as much of a village feel, or you didn't sense so much of a village as Dalston and some of the places you mentioned are?
Well, I mean, East London's always been a liminal place, and always been a place of transitory populations, and particularly the further you sort of go out towards London, that's more sort of being, if you look at the history of East London, you had the Huguenots, and then you had the Jewish people, and then you had people from Bangladesh, and then increasingly we had a lot of people from Eastern Europe, but also from Somalia and things like that. And there's always that sort of, and I think I hasten to add, that's one of the reasons that I live in this part of the world, because the fact Stoke Newington has the finest Carolan restaurant outside Kerala is because some people from Kerala ended up coming to here,
and they make the finest food.
Yeah, cool. And that's Rasa, of course. When I first came to London, the only reason you went to Stoke Newington, and it took ages because the buses were really rubbish and things like, you went to have dinner at Rasa, which was fantastic and cheap, as it still is today. But because there's lots of transitory populations and things like that, I think that is that sort of counts against that sort of villagey type thing.
Yeah,
but there are plenty of strong communities in East London, of whole different kinds. I mean, the Bangladeshi community in Tower Hamlets, the HSJ offices are in Whitechapel, and you only have to walk from our offices, which are above the Aldgate East Change Station, to Whitechapel, to see, the city changes. Beneath your feet as you walk. As you walk.
I cycle into work from Stratford to Westminster, and along that Whitechapel Road, I see it as well, from Stratford, Bow into Whitechapel and into central London. It's such a interesting change.
Yeah.
History literally in front.
And there's strong communities there. I mean, London, let's not beat about the bush. A lot of the places I mentioned are places that have been significantly gentrified, and therefore, that's brought investment, and that's accentuated the village type feel. So Stoke Newington in the 80s, 70s, 80s, really rough place, really rough. A lot of squatting going on and things like that. And there are certain Stoke Newington residents that look misty-eyed about that period, when it had a bit of edge, and it's definitely not like that now.
I mean, for your son, you hope not as well, right?
But it's still got enough of it left. It's still got enough of it left. No, I mean, like many parts, it was. I think I saw some stats, something about Hackney having the highest proportion of under fives of any borough in the country, or something like that. It's just an incredible number of young children.
Wow.
Of here, and it's a mix of the fact that it's full of places like this where middle class people like myself come to have children, and more sort of working class areas, typically with communities from ethnic backgrounds who tend to have lots of children. So you end up with very complicated, that classic sort of city way of melding. You just suddenly area with loads of kids, and that's really nice. It's and that gives it a nice feel. Do I sort of think, well, that London of the 1990s, the East End of no, I once nearly bought a house in the same street that Tracy Chapman, not Tracy Chapman, what am I saying? Tracy, the artist. Yes.
Elvis? No.
Oh God, I can't remember.
I know who you mean though.
Yes, sorry. Not Tracy Chapman. Totally different thing. I nearly bought a house on the street which was just full of these new British artists, and that was the time that that sort of. Now that's gone. Now it's moved out further to places around Stratford. The areas between here and Stratford, around the canals, it's really interesting. Really sort of I really like going there. You get a sense of real life. But there's still so many creative people that still live here. Naren goes to school with people. One of his, it's the least boring school run you can possibly imagine. One of his best friends, his mother is the producer of The Crown, and his father is a chap called Fife Dangerfield, great name, who was the band the Guillemots, who were shortlisted for the Mercury Prize, and it's just. Everybody's got an interesting job or does something interesting. Some people are very successful, like Una, who's the producer of the Crown, but nobody's
boring.
Apologies to all accountants, chartered accountants out there, and my dad was an accountant. There aren't many accountants, basically. It's got that sort of, it's just very, very
character and life.
It's got lots of character, and it's a lot. It's a lot more gentrified than it was, but it's not gone completely that way. I think it's the people who come here; they are still a bit countercultural in some ways, and I like that mix. And do I like the fact that Clapton High Road, which is not too very far, is no longer Murder Mile? Well, of course I do. And that is partly a result of gentrification. And I realise to a certain extent that the problems have only been shifted up the road to Edmonton. So I do.
But let's talk a little bit about the impact of gentrification. As you said, positive ones there in terms of road safety. Let's talk about some of the positive impacts first, and then maybe some of the not so positive impacts. So yeah, any other thoughts, particularly as parts of Stratford, Leighton, the Olympic Village might be experiencing some of that. I definitely am. So as I said earlier, I live in the council house that I grew up in, and so that's been 30 odd years of seeing change. And now I'm seeing different shops, coffee shops, even you're talking about transient populations. So Newham is one of the most transient populations. but the very short-term hotel, Airbnb, renters are emerging around the area as well. And for me, that's a sense of.
Do you think
it's a nice thing, but it's also a bit anxious, like who are you coming through my park? I'm trying to play with my daughter. Do you know what I mean? But yeah.
Do you what is the Stratford you live in now better than the Stratford you grew up in?
Yeah. The short answer is yes. Particularly because of some of the stuff we were talking about earlier about like crime and safety. A lot safer, a lot more going for it, and equally like yourself, when you want to look for stuff to do with your family, it's on your doorstep as opposed to coming into central London for some of its museum and other niceties. So yes, it's a better Stratford, obviously, a better Bow area. But yeah, the gentrification question for yourself: how does a city planner, how do people, keep the soul whilst welcoming new people in?
Cities, I think, are, a bit like the NHS. They're complex mechanisms, complex, sort of ecosystems, and not an expert on town planning in any kind of way. I think what I would just say is that cities, my experience, cities thrive when they are a mixture of things, and the worst parts of cities are cities where you have, lots of people from just the same background, because it becomes very monocultural and quite sort of inward looking and things like that. And where you can get people from different communities living side by side and from different sort of economic statuses living side by side, you get, I think, vibrant, and where people can afford to live, close enough to places where money is made. And, London is far from a perfect place, but I've been to a lot of cities overseas, and it gets it right quite a lot of the time, probably as much by accident as by design. London has never been a city that has been had a grand plan. It's never been so. Of course, when the Great Fire of London, Wren had this idea to sort of turn it into Paris with great broad thoroughfares and everything like that, and that plan didn't get through. No, they wanted to keep the medieval street plan and things like that, which is why the city is full of these strange little villages that sit alongside. That as you can see from this map, they're just sort of been taken over by London, but they've got their distinctive nature. So I think where gentrification is really harmful is where it results in the replacement of one population by another, particularly a population that has no roots in that area, or no connection.
So how interventionist do you think a council government should be then to protect the incumbent community, the incumbent soul, etc.?
Well, I think it's very important that there is, when there is new development, that a significant proportion, significant debate, but a significant portion is kept for social housing. It's very, very important. Not only for the kind of cultural and social cohesion reasons I've talked about, but you have to have somewhere for your key workers to live. It's no good if all your nurses and teachers, and bus drivers are having to live miles away and commute that in. That's no good for any.
And let me get a little bit more narrowed down on this now. And again, this is obviously a personal view, so hopefully you feel comfortable to share. But thinking about some of the history as well. So the Bangladeshi community largely having bigger families than some of the, for want of a better word, the native white population who experienced a lot of the poverty of the early 80s and the Docklands changing, etc. So some of that, I understand, some of the social housing policy was to build houses that would favour the bigger families, which and then so the point I'm getting at is that social housing means different things to different societies and people of society, because one group, if you make the application process favour bigger families, then people with smaller families miss out. So how do you try and cater for even people that don't want families, and the people that need to make that city young and vibrant? And
I mean it is a sort of delicate thing, which if you try and mess with too much, you can, no city planner should ever sit down and go, how can I create a space for young artists to,
they'll find 10%. So that's literal social engineering. Right?
They'll find their own. They'll find the deserted warehouses, or they'll do it. So there's got cities are where you come to for a lot of people, where you come to express your freedom and you express your creativity and things like that. You don't want planning, that thing, but of course you do want planning to make sure that your key workers can live near where they work. So I think there's I think as long as people are thinking, we need to have we need to make sure that a monoculture does not develop in our areas. Then they're on the right track. The details are so different in different in different areas.
But I think East London is far from that kind of risk.
No, I know, and as I say, I've lived in London since the mid-80s, so I've seen areas, like Crouch End and Muswell Hill and Stoke Newington become gentrified. Now I'm probably not the best judge, but I don't think they've lost their souls. I don't think they've lost their their character. Maybe because I know a lot about it and I can think, maybe other people think differently. And of course, it's your experience of it. It's like you growing up in Stratford, and you've been there all the time, and you see things like that, and you probably think we've gained things and we've lost some things.
Yeah, and I do think it's important, and this is why I wanted to do the video podcast series, that those stories are told, because otherwise it may be a historian or an expert who tells a particular narrative that doesn't capture some of the other stuff that, and this may only ever have 150 views, but it is a recording in history that tells a particular story. I want to change tack, if I may, to health of the area. So as editor of the HSJ, obviously we can't go too political as a civil servant, but let's talk about health and the facilities on offer. I don't know where to begin. Where do you feel most comfortable to begin when you think about health services? Some of the disparities of healthcare within East London, and your experience of healthcare even. I mean,
so we probably just explain a little bit what HSJ is. So HSJ stands for Health Service Journal. It is on February the 2nd. It will be 131 years old, and the easiest way to think of it, most people have heard of the British Medical Journal. Well, we're about all the things that aren't hands-on clinical care. So we're about funding, about policy, about workforce, about the politics of healthcare. And East London...
And very good for it as well.
Thank you very much.
As a subscriber and reader.
Thank you very much. East London has been one of the petri dishes for healthcare in this country, particularly for the NHS, but beforehand as well. And because it is where William Booth did his famous maps of poverty, and began to, no, it wasn't William, sorry, William Booth is the founder of the Salvation Army. The name of the person who did the maps escapes me, but I get confused with William Booth, founder of the Salvation Army, is buried in Abney Park Cemetery. He's the most famous person, and his wife Catherine buried there. But you know, poverty, want, need was mapped for the first time in the East End of Squalor. Yes, Squalor. Was mapped for the first time in East London, and was long before the creation of the NHS was a focus of what can we do for these poor people, you know, and things like that. And of course, lots of efforts by the people who lived in there to, you know, take care of themselves. This area probably belongs to Finsbury Park, but the Finsbury, just off Green Lanes up towards Manor House, first ever purpose-built health centre in the NHS was built, still there, and you know, so there's been a lot, and because of the different migrant communities, health service, a lot of what the health service has done in the rest of the part of the country, I think, as the rest of the country has become more like London, which it has, because the mix of ethnicities, the general urbanisation, sort of a lot of, you know, what started in London, a lot of senior healthcare figures spent time in East London, because it's one of those places where you came and you learnt about the really difficult choices in healthcare, how you cared for people whose whose lifestyles weren't conducive to good health, who hadn't learnt good health behaviours, whose life chances were very restricted by lots of things, and who weren't used to interacting with a health service, you know, with a Western health service, so it's been a place where there's a lot of experimentation gone on, and it's a place where there's been a lot of triumph. You know, even to this day, the Homerton Hospital, which is the hospital closest to us, I mean, that's one of the best A&Es in the country, which, given it's surrounded by A&Es who definitely aren't the worst, you know, where you know, it shows what we can done. And East London Foundation Trust, the mental health trust there, an outstanding trust, very you know, the work that it's done amongst Bangladeshi communities and other in those areas, you know, who for a whole range of societal and cultural reasons have been sort of resistant to, you know, the very concept of sort of mental health or mental, you know, illness, and you know, keeping that in the family and things like that. Fascinating stuff, and it's sort of really really influential on what's happening in the rest of the country. Probably by Bow Health Centre, Sir Sam Everington, pioneers of social prescribing, and you know, they're doing social prescribing. I always think of it as like they're doing proper social, because they're dealing with a community that is, you know, quite deprived in many areas. With lots of, and you know, they're not just we'll prescribe you some tennis lessons. You know, that's not going to work. This is like, you know, this is stuff that is, you know, changing people's lives. So the NHS healthcare and also of course there's very strong voluntary organisations in East London. Salvation Army being the, you know, the very first one, and indeed I won't say it here, is one of the chief executives. Little known fact: one of the chief executives of one of the East London NHS trusts is a senior figure in the Salvation Army. Yeah, you know, so which is that I really like the fact that
there is still a cross highway because even it's Skipton House, NHS England's former HQ. The Salvation Army HQ was just across the road, so it's So that sort of, you know, this, if you like, the good and the bad of East London. The fact that East London is a place which has a lot of poverty, a lot of disadvantage. You know, it has a lot of bad outcomes. People die earlier in East London. It has a lot of services under incredible stress, but it also has people full of innovation and creativity and not prepared. It's an area full of activists. Not in a political sense, but people want to be active in their community, and that's great. You feel like you're living with people who care about their community. Yeah, gentrification has knocked a bit off that, but only a bit. I was going to ask, do you think East London health workers and healthcare leaders have to defend that approach? Because I wonder, you know, you look at other parts of the country, hospital locations per, you know, 1,000 population, maybe not as dense, not as high compared to London or East London. And when they look at the model of care that we have, and, you know, the national conversation at the moment is looking at reform and everything else like that, do you think that soul of innovation that you talk about within East London, you know, people need to recognise and protect that a little bit, or ignore it and kind of crack on?
I think to a certain extent that's again one of the things where you can't, if you try and intervene too directly. The kind of people who come and live in East London, they want to live in a place where things are done, interesting things are done and explored, and certainly my experience, they don't want. People don't come to East London, I think, because, I hasten to add, I do not have any kind of hard life, but you know, it can be a hard place to live, East London, compared to where other places where you could live. You know, it's, you know,
one of the poorest boroughs in London.
Yeah, and you know, crime is a problem.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, you know, and anybody can be a victim of crime. They people hacked the catalytic converter off the bottom of my camper van outside my house about 3 months ago. Ran down the street, jacked it up, and ran off with it. And you know, so and as a father of a young boy who grew up to be a teenager in London, you know, I don't. If your kids, you've got sons.
7-month-old son and a 4-year-old daughter.
Yeah, I mean, so you know, you'll know far better than I. The sort of, you know, growing up, certainly growing up as a black teenager in London. There's, you know, my one son that, you know, who. Let's hope it's much better now, but
still challenges.
It's definitely, you know, that is a, you know, it's a thing, and you'd be a fool to sort of say it isn't. So, you know, there are plenty of downsides to living in London.
Actually,
but it's more than made up, as far as I was concerned, by that sort of
absolutely
spirit of activism you find here.
And there's something I've thought from afar within the National Health Service, where, for example, I think it was within South London that, you know, knife clinics, that innovation was first brought up, etc. I always looked from afar and thought that feels like a bit of an overreach for the NHS. I'm sure there are good clinical reasons why those clinical services existed, and perhaps there were other gaps in, you know, social services.
Well, I mean, so here's what I think about that. Is it great? Is it a good thing that there are highly skilled surgeons who are able to, you know, treat knife wounds in the best way, in the best way possible. Absolutely, of course it is. Of course, that can't be anything. If you ran a cost-benefit analysis of the cost of those surgical teams compared to interventions in early years, I mean like under 5, and how much you could do with the money that you could, how many people could you reach, how many people you could stop ever ending up being stabbed or stabbing someone, so
you get a lot more value for your money.
Yeah, I mean, we all like the heroic surgeon. It's all it's all great Sunday supplements stuff, and obviously in itself it cannot be anything other than a good thing. Is it the answer to London's knife crime? London hasn't got a knife crime problem. It's got a poverty problem and a lack of opportunity problem. And that surely is where the money. That's where the money should be spent as a priority.
And so sometimes I wonder if we're victims of our own success, particularly NHS healthcare leaders from where I sit, very politically, sophisticated, nuanced in understanding how to argue for investment, how to kind of keep it on the agenda, the soul of the country, etc. And yeah, I never know what to do about that, because obviously I've been in the NHS for over 15 years.
Yeah. So I've written editorials which basically put forward the idea that the NHS is its own worst enemy, in that as much as it is so loved and so valued and has such an ability to pull funding towards it, because although it hasn't got enough money as it needs, it's got a hell of a lot more money than other services. And in pulling that money, and in a perfect world, of course, the NHS should get all the money it needs, and everyone else should get all the money it needs. But because it's the NHS, and there is a finite budget, and always will be a finite budget, whatever government we will have, it will always pour more than its fair share, because it is the NHS, and that means it can spend money on brilliantly skilled surgeons, but the local authority doesn't have the money to spend, or the education or the schools don't have money on those early years interventions, which enormous amounts of evidence shows that is the way that you deal with that particular problem. You intervene in early years, not only for the children's sake, but for the parents' sake and things like that.
There's obviously a challenge we have with short-term political leaders who have to achieve.
Well, it's bigger than that.
Immediate impact.
It's bigger than that thing now. I think one thing you'll hear many politicians say is, we've got to stop the NHS becoming an illness service and become a wellness service. In other words, to make people weller, things like that. But of course, healthcare has very little to do with making people well. It's good at stopping people being sick. It's not, and should a healthcare service be charged with wellness? Well, I've always thought that is a very questionable supposition, because it's not healthcare that makes us well. It's employment, it's housing, it's education. Those are the things that make us well.
The wider determinants of health.
Yeah. What I always say, the wider determinants, is you just knock off the wider. They're the determinants of health.
Yeah.
Like there's there's the core determinants of health, that somehow that the healthcare is like the core. No, it's the determinants of health.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Good point.
That's a good point. I must find a way to write something about that. But it's that things which deserves. But of course, the NHS has become. There's a often repeated mantra in policy circles that the British public want Scandinavian levels of public service on American levels of taxation.
Yeah.
And I think that there is some significant truth in that general thing, and it means that the public finances are always going to be limited, and we're in a very reductive game where it's like, shall we give more money to the NHS? Yes. Shall we give more money to education? Well, maybe. Shall we give more money to anything else? No. And it's because it's like, spending it on that's a good thing, but everything else is a bad thing, or or it doesn't have that sort of. Nobody's going to. It's very hard for politicians to campaign, and it's very hard for politicians to campaign and to follow through on the line that says, we're going to give the NHS more money, but we're going to give it less than it is asking for, because we want to give more to education or local government.
I'm sure there's a snazzy slogan that can encapsulate that, but just moving on slightly, the last thing on health, about spending, and given the high ethnic minority population within parts of East London, I'm seeing from certain parts of the political commentary this kind of anti-woke attack on parts of the NHS that's spending on diversity and inclusion. Wonder your thoughts on that, because particularly, parts of East London needs that improvement in health disparities, but the headlines of 60k for a ethnic diversity inclusion manager. Outside of London, people don't get that, and they see it, and it causes reactions. What's your thoughts?
So I think. Let's face it, the NHS is not always its is often its own worst enemy in the way that it talks about these things, because it talks about it in a way that's almost guaranteed to upset the commentators in the Daily Mail, etc. And actually, dresses it up in language that, I'm a woolly North London liberal, and I just think, oh, come on, you don't need to dress it in such grand terms. It's all about just working to achieve equality, which not many people argue with. The second thing to say is the amount that the NHS spends on so-called wokery is minute, tiny. The thing about the NHS is people always put the decimal point in the wrong place. They think £1 million is a lot of money in the NHS. It's not. It really is not. It's not even a lot in East London healthcare. It's not even a lot in Hackney healthcare. £1 million is not a lot of money. It goes like that, because healthcare's, it's often cost intensive. Not for reasons that it shouldn't be, but it is. So the amount of money that people spend on wokery is minute.
So continue with the spend, but maybe change the language about how.
I think there's, in the culture wars in which we live, I just think don't bait the bear. If do you see what I mean? There's ways of just getting on with it. But if you look at it from a purely policy point of view, you say two things. One is, we have a workforce, NHS workforce, where a very significant number of them come from minority ethnic backgrounds. And in some parts of London, in some parts of the country, like East London, the majority of nurses in East London, probably by far the majority of nurses in East London, come from an ethnic background, and staff surveys and things like that show that these people have experienced significantly higher levels of bullying and harassment and restricted career choices and things like that than their white counterparts. we're in the middle of a workforce crisis. We need people to stay and prosper. So on a purely calculating policy way, you've got to look after those people.
And you need to research and spend,
you're going to
understand how to keep them.
Yeah, you've got to look after those people, and they're not being looked after because the evidence is staring you in the face. Now, whether the best way to do that is to have people in posts in trusts monitoring those kind of outcomes, well, I think somebody needs to do it. You don't want to give it to a doctor or a nurse, do you? You know, somebody's got to do it because you actually got to see whether what you're trying to do is to make a difference. Whether the answer is to pay them more, you know, or whatever, etc., etc. But the idea that you can do nothing
and just tell people or webinars and things will change.
Yeah, the idea that you can do nothing is
Did Niall's come back?
Hello, little one. He's still come back to you. We have a very important conversation about health policy now. I'm being very, very eloquent.
What's health policy?
You know what health policy. Anyway,
an area maybe you want to get into.
Yeah. Are you coming to say good night?
Yes.
All right. Good night. Off you go.
Good night.
Night. So that's the staff side of things. Then if you look at providing it to the population, well, ethnic populations tend to, not always, and it's very, very dangerous to talk about all populations. Some, I think I'm right in saying this, that Chinese people of Chinese heritage tend to have better health outcomes than people of white heritage. You have to be very, very distinct. And we right where we are now, we're next to Stamford Hill, biggest community of ultra-Orthodox Jews outside Israel, and they've got really bad health outcomes. They're all white, but for reasons that their health outcomes are poor. They've got a lot better actually, but they're still poor.
Yeah,
so you just have to be very careful about
very careful, but bold enough to actually have the conversation.
Yeah,
and we've moved on because the language was I think we're still evolving, but it was BAME, which as you say was quite monolithic and homogenous, even though they're not. But do you think we are confident enough now to progress into actually naming and talking about?
Well, I think you're absolutely right in that sort of understanding the problem at a granular level is the answer, because solution for the Bangladeshi community, solutions that will work in the Bangladeshi community in Tower Hamlets may be quite distinctly different from the people of Indian heritage in Southall, or Afro-Caribbean and African heritage in
West Africa.
It's all there are different health needs, there are different cultural needs, but in general, and I'd say this is exactly the same for poorer, white working class people living in Lincolnshire, where health outcomes are very poor, down that eastern seaboard of London. If your population is sicker than it needs to be, the cost of healthcare is going to be higher. So getting that doing what you can to make that population as well as possible benefits everyone, because there's more money to go around, and producing healthcare services that people from ethnic community, for everybody accesses as soon as possible, overcomes cultural barriers and things like that, means you get much less late presentation of cancers and everything else and things like that. And of course, one of the success stories in East London has been HIV prevention amongst the African diaspora in East London and various parts of London, things like that. You know, there was a lot of concern, particularly, you know, at the height that, no, but even that, you know, that the messages couldn't be got through to that community for all kinds of cultural reasons, but they did get through, didn't they? You know, and that situation, though far from perfect, is much better than it was or could have become.
Yeah, and I think part of that was a lot of the marketing for, you know, the gun clinics and the SCI services was quite bold and intentional in speaking to the communities.
Yeah.
Do you think there is a British nervousness about talking about race and being quite blunt to say, actually, yeah, this is what should happen for Chinese migrant communities, or, you know, this area of the world, and actually just, yeah, calling out what it is?
I don't think it's a British thing now. I think, you know, Black Lives Matter and, you know, the whole polarisation of politics and the cultural wars, whether there was a British Reserve about it, which probably was, I think that's now been trumped by the sheer sort of terror of saying the wrong thing, you know. You know, there are. I think there's on one side there's the terror of saying the wrong thing, and then there's the other side, which is the sort of people who, you know, that even if you say the right thing, people pick a fight with you.
And let me dig into that, because as the editor of the HSJ, I wonder, when you do speak to politicians and healthcare leaders, whether you sense that now. For example, you you feel the media training oozing through people as you speak to them, as they try and pick the right words to talk about healthcare, or do you manage to disarm them anyway and kind of get to the truth? And
yeah, I mean, it's a bit different because most of the time I'm not talking to people on the record. Because of the job I do, I'm actually talking to people on non-attributable or on background basis. So there's much less of that in the kind of journalism that we do.
That's why you get all the scoops.
That's why we get all the scoops. So yeah, there's less of that sort of that tension. Yeah, there's more. There was. I tell you, you know, the people who really tried to manage the message with the New Labour period. I mean, that's when you really got beaten up by press officers. That by far, they were much more tough than anybody that the Tories have had in. Much more tough. You know, nobody's got anywhere near Alastair Campbell, and the people that work. Nobody anywhere near it. So you know, that, you know, it's just worth saying. The thing about the NHS, actually, which makes it a joy to write about, is it's very big. So there's lots. You can always find someone to talk to. You can often journalism is about finding a string and just like pulling it and just seeing what unravels. And there's always a string to pull in the NHS.
So many strings.
And you know, I've been the editor of HSJ for over 20 years, and so I know lots of people, and you know, so therefore, I know which strings to reach for. So, you know, I just finished Maria Ressa's How to Stand Up to a Dictator book about her journalism in the Philippines, and you know. You can see there where, you know, somebody was confronted by someone by a political force who were using social media to actually subvert the truth and good quality journalism, and it's a fascinating book and a real sort of lesson about the dangers of social media and about the algorithms that sort of drive what we are presented with so much, but I suppose in the way that I'm just luckily I'm luckily not been in that position. You know, health policy journalism, it is affected by that kind of debates. I've seen it over vaccine hesitancy and things like that. But it's still an area where establishing the facts and getting agreement around the facts is possible. Now, whether it will be able to be like that, I don't know. But you know, obviously, I hope it continues.
We've touched on some of your personal interests in journalism, etc. I just want to maybe for the last 5-10 minutes go into that a little bit more, because one of the things I thought this would be useful for was also capturing you, because there isn't actually a lot of information about you out there. So I think I saw that you worked in Hong Kong for some time.
Let's see, so potted history. So I became a journalist in the mid-80s. First half of my first 16 years, I wrote about the construction and engineering sector, in which I did things like I found myself reporting on the reconstruction effort after the first Gulf War. I was the first non-embedded journalist into Kuwait after the Iraqi pullout, and also I did a big piece on the Hong Kong handover. Because Hong Kong was a place where a lot of construction firms, British construction firms and engineering firms were, and that's very interesting because I did a lot about corruption, because that was the big fear that when the British left, the corruption that is so endemic in some parts of in China would come, and that would destroy the idea of Hong Kong as this sort of, you know, safe place to do business, which is why it had prospered. And then I became editor of HSJ in 2002. I also, in the 1990s, I was a sort of part-time sports journalist, and cricket was my sport, and I wrote a lot of books about, wrote 5 books on cricket, edited a monthly magazine, and did things like that.
Awesome. Last thing, maybe talk about this book.
Yeah, talk about this book. So people might have realised that I like a good map, and I like a good map. I particularly like maps of London. I collect books on maps of London. This is one of my favourite books, and it is bomb damage maps of the Blitz, and it basically has a colour code, which you can see here.
We'll zoom in.
The darker the colour, the more damage was done. So this is the pages for take my glasses off when I see what I'm doing. This is the pages for Stoke Newington. There is there's Abney Park Cemetery. There's Clissold Park. Here's Defoe Road, which I live. My house is down here, and you can see here there's a circle, and that's a circle where a V1 bomb landed, destroyed all the houses at the top of the street, which is why they're all modern housing, social housing at the top of my street. But you can see the level of devastation that Stoke Newington suffered. Most of these houses actually are still here, but some of them, there's another one here, and you could always, and the estate agents in Stoke Newington have a rather euphemistic, when they say, "Well, that street has bomb damage," what they mean, that street has social housing on it, because they basically built social housing where the things are. But there's another little thing here which is sort of fascinating and sort of it's a very useful lesson when dealing with data. Now, in the NHS, writing about the NHS and working in the NHS, a lot of what you do is data driven, yeah? So look, this is very interesting, isn't it? Here, look. So here's the A10, Old Ermine Street, running up here. Here's all the bombing. Look, there, and you think, bloody hell, what happened? Why did all the bombs fall on that side of the road? And I asked a guy who's an expert on this, and he said, well, basically, he said, whoever got the job of doing that side of the A10, basically was a bit lazy and just didn't, So there's this idea. You think, oh well, there must be a reason why German bombs didn't fall on this area, or maybe there was something about the way the wind was blowing. No, it's just the way the data's recorded. So it's absolutely fascinating because you can look at this and draw some conclusion, but you think, hold on a second. How much can I rely on this?
That's crazy, but also scary.
Yeah, you can just see it. I'm reading a very good book at the moment called Bad Data, about how so much of the data that we rely on and policymakers rely on to make decisions is questionable for both good and bad reasons, and how we feel the need to have data on everything now, but it's like, as long as it's data, just gives data. We won't worry too much about
though a lot of it can be gamified and biased and skewed.
Exactly about
that. I might not want to end there because that's a bit of a weird place to end. My last question then is visions, thoughts, future of East London, your part in its history as someone who's lived here for so long. And as you describe, in Nairon School, you're with lots of other influential, successful people who live here, invest here, their children want to grow here. Whether as an active citizen or someone who
my wife Nina and I have said that living and working in London has felt like a journey to be able to afford a house in Stoke Newington and have the here, and we are very lucky. Very, very lucky to live in Stoke Newington. I can't imagine, I really do think it's the best place to live in the world. And we all sort of entertained the fantasies, didn't we, during the pandemic, that we're going to move to, the Orkneys or something like that.
My missus did as well.
Yeah, we all do that. But, I would never leave here because it is an area, it is a place where there's always something going on, and meeting interesting people is so easy. It just really is. I can tell you so many stories of really interesting people that I've just bumped into on the streets of Stoke Newington. Really, really interesting people. Some famous, some not, but just nobody's boring here.
No, and this is a classic example of that.
And so, I think. I hope East London retains that. I hope East London retains its character, by which I hope it retains its diversity, and I think there's a reasonable chance of that. Bits of East London will change. Some will get better, some will get worse, and you hope that the bits that are bad now get better than the other bits get worse and things like that. But East London's a poor part of the country relatively. We're in for some pretty grim years, we know.
Probably already, if you talk to some councillors like I have done, I think we're already there now.
Yeah, we're there now, and they're going to go on for a bit. And it's going to be particularly tough in East London because people's resilience. But I do have faith in that spirit of activism within East London, that it will pull the part of the city through, and because people who want to do things in 100 different ways, particularly sort of creative things, still coming to East London. not just from the UK, but from all over the world.
That is very
You
true.
know,
Yeah.
and you know, I've not seen any. You know, they're still coming. They might be going to other, but they're still coming. So things like that. So it's going to be a very difficult few years for East London. But I don't see any kind of, you know, I don't believe there's an existential threat to it. Some people do. Talk to someone like Ian Sinclair or something like that. You know, there are some people who think, you know, something has been lost from East London. They may well be right, and probably think some things have, but you know, I can't see myself living anywhere else.
Neither can I. Alastair, it's been a privilege. Thank you so much for welcoming me into your lovely home. There's so many other artefacts that the camera's not picking up. We could talk into the graphic novels, the records here, the models and other stuff, but I think that's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.